Story 1. When I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of grad school, I was ready to start my teaching career. I landed a job at a Title I elementary school near my home, teaching art. I was thrilled, especially because I could walk to work. However, I was so caught up in my excitement that I missed all the warning signs. Warning sign number 1. It was a week before school started, and I had called and emailed the school office staff and my principal to ask about getting my keys and badge so I could start preparing for the school year. No response, no answers. So I called the district office to ask when and where I could pick up my keys and badge. 2 days before school started, I finally got an email from my administrator saying I should have been more patient and that I shouldn't have contacted the main office about my keys and badge. When I finally got everything and entered my classroom, I was horrified by how much I needed to do. Apparently, they had used my room as storage. It was packed with tables and desks stacked on top of each other, 8 filing cabinets, and over 100 chairs stacked all around the room. I managed to clean out the space with the help of an awesome custodian. Shout out to all custodians who are the backbone of helping teachers get ready for the school year. Hurdle number 1 finished. Warning sign number 2. It was the day classes started, and I still hadn't been informed of the schedule, like which days I'd see certain classes and when. So I emailed my principal again, asking about the schedule and if there was a digital document I could print out. I got an email back a few minutes later telling me to stop pressuring and bullying her. I replied, apologizing if I had made her feel that way, but mentioned that it would be nice to know which classes I had and when. Warning sign number 3. At 8:10 a.m., just 10 minutes after school started, I finally got my schedule, only to find out that I had 2 classes at the same time. My school wasn't huge, but we still had 14 classes serving grades K-6. So I ended up with at least 46 kids in one classroom by myself. Moreover, I had 7 45-minute periods a day and saw every class every day of the week, with only a 30-minute lunch, which was actually when I was on lunch duty. I asked my principal if there was any way we could adjust the schedule so I'd have time to plan and get the classroom ready for the next class without losing instruction time. With a class waiting outside, she yelled at me, saying, "This is your first year teaching, and you don't know what you need. You just have to deal with it." But I decided not to just deal with it. I read the teacher's contract for the district and found a section about classroom size. It stipulated that if you had a class with more than 30 students, you were entitled to have an educational assistant to help. I brought this up with my principal after a month and a half of struggling, and surprise, I was denied and told there was no money in the budget. She said I would have to make do without it or quit. I'm stubborn and determined to make things work with what little I have, but things were rough. In order to prep and plan everything for the next day, grade meaningfully, keep up with referrals, and stay in contact with families, I had to be at the school from 6 a.m. when the morning custodian arrived until 9 p.m. when the night janitor was leaving on weekdays. I even spent weekends planning and grading. When it came time for my first teacher evaluation, I dreaded it. However, I got all satisfactory marks from my principal. I was shocked, but little did I know this was all part of her plan. A few more weeks passed, and I'd had enough. I talked with our union about the double classes and told them it wasn't sustainable. I explained that my classroom couldn't safely fit more than 30 students, let alone 46. They said they would handle it. But weeks went by, and nothing changed. It was now the week of Thanksgiving, and with conferences over, I had 2 days to not worry about anything. I decided to go to a potluck dinner with some old friends. The best part of the evening, and maybe the part that saved my career and sanity, was when I ended up talking with an old acquaintance and his new husband about the teaching job I had landed and how the school year was going. I mentioned that, although my students were amazing and had such creative minds, it was frustrating not to have the time they deserved. Handling 2 classes at once made it hard to give attention to everyone in just 45 minutes. The husband raised an eyebrow and asked me what school I worked at. So I told him, what harm could it do? Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, Little did I know I was talking with my principal's supervisor. I found out the next Monday when my administrator stormed into my room at 8:05 a.m. to scream and yell at me, threatening to fire me and ensure I never worked in education again. I was shocked and confused at the time. However, later that week at our staff meeting, we discussed a change in the schedule. From then on, only one class would be in my room at a time for an hour, and I would only see them twice a week instead of all 5 days. It was magical. The kids were happier, I was calmer, and I was able to help each individual student if they needed it. I could even plan enough throughout the day so I could leave by 4 p.m. Sadly, my happiness didn't last forever. I noticed my principal stalking my room, coming in non-stop to observe me. It was awkward. I also had a few of my very extroverted students come in quiet and unable to focus on work. When I asked them if everything was okay, they would burst into tears and say, "I don't want you to go." Being confused, I always responded with, "Oh, don't worry. I have no intentions of going anywhere. You are all the best students a teacher could ever ask for." This would cheer them up for a while, but then they would come in upset again the following week. It all clicked when, the day before we left for Christmas break, my principal came into my room with one of her minions, who was our building's union representative, to tell me I was being put on a teacher support plan. This plan would evaluate whether or not my contract with the district would be renewed at the end of the school year. I was shocked, and my union rep just snickered and walked away giggling with our administrator. I felt sick and abused, unable to feel any emotion. It wasn't until I got home and read what this plan entailed that I saw red. I had hit my breaking point. This is when I started to formulate a plan of revenge. Some things to note. Our principal liked to come into school whenever she felt like it. She would arrive anywhere from 7:45 a.m. our actual contract hours to as late as 9:30 a.m. She once showed up at noon without telling anyone. I also knew she had kept renewing a certain after-school care contractor that wasn't free for families, even though they received money from the district to offer it for free. I also knew that the person running the after-school care was dating and living with our principal. During winter break, my acquaintance and his husband called and asked if I was free to get drinks over the holidays. I love a good cocktail, and I needed some hard liquor. When we met up, I wanted to talk about anything other than school, just to keep my mind off the drama. But the husband brought up whether things were better after he had talked about the double classes. That's when I found out he was her boss. I asked, "What do you mean you talked to my principal? How do you know her?" New husband, "Oh, you didn't know? I'm the supervising administrator for that group of schools." My jaw dropped, and I started to hyperventilate. The husband was startled and asked what was wrong. So I told him everything. I told him how she yelled and threatened to get me fired, how she put me on this support plan, and how she kept observing my class without notifying me. His face went from a concerned look to surprise, and then to red with anger. He told me, "I always had a bad feeling about her, and I wondered why there were always so many new teachers at that school every year. What else can you tell me about what's going on?" I hesitated to tell him everything, but my acquaintance assured me not to worry. He said they had seen this look before and that they were on my side. So I told them everything I knew. They both sat there, awestruck and unable to speak. After the break, I was dreading going back to my class, but I didn't want to miss seeing my students. So I pushed on. As I was walking down the hall to my mailbox, I saw a few of my students who had cried and told me they didn't want me to leave. They ran up and gave me the biggest, longest hug ever, saying, "You're here, you're here." Me? Of course I'm here. I wouldn't leave the best students ever, now would I? Students. But the principal said you were going to leave us because you didn't want to be here, and that we should give you trouble before you left. Me trying to hold back my anger. Oh, maybe she was talking about how I was leaving to visit family over the break. No need to worry, I'm still here. Yes, this wretched woman tried to purposely make kids misbehave in my class, so she could write me up for not having good rapport with my students. I was beyond livid. So, the next time I had class with that student, I asked if they could make a comic book of the conversation they had with a principal when she told them I was leaving, and create an ending they wanted. Phase 1 started. Phase 2. I contacted my principal's supervisor and told him that per my contract, I wanted another administrator to accompany my principal during the teacher support observations, and I wanted it to be him. He agreed but told me not to inform my principal just yet. The first day of my observation came, and my principal walked in without a notebook or anything to take notes. She looked proud of herself, as if she was about to get away with firing me. She was shocked and confused when her boss walked in with a laptop and sat next to her, taking notes on how I was doing. She fumbled around and asked me for a notepad to take notes. I told her, I don't have an extra notepad, but I do have some poster paper. We were making movie posters for a project. I hope you can be better prepared next time so as not to disrupt my class and take time away from their instruction. Her boss just smirked. Phase 3. I started calling my new best friend her boss whenever she was late getting to school, and he would do a random stop by if he was close. He documented that she wasn't showing up to work on time and wasn't submitting the paperwork to have it deducted from her leave minutes. Overall, we caught her at least twice a week for a solid month. I think he even asked someone from Human Resources to come to our school at 9 a.m. to see for themselves, and she still wasn't there. Phase 4. This was my favorite part, getting the parents on board. I started talking to parents who always seemed to be late picking up their students. They mentioned that it was hard to get there on time, and that they often had to leave work early. When I told them about our after-school care program, they said it was too expensive. However, I informed them that since we were a Title I school, after-school care was free and paid for by the district. I gave them a handy flyer I made with the website to fill out the forms and instructions on which ones to complete. Word spread quickly to parents who were paying the contractors directly that it was supposed to be free. And boy, was that a fun parent-teacher association meeting to attend. I also made sure the principal knew it was me who informed the parents about the free after-school care program. After this, there were countless investigations at our school. Head administrators from the central office started visiting, auditors came in, and our union finally got involved, trying to play the heroes victims of the situation. The outcome, the second half of the year, was very chill. My new best friend ensured that my teacher support plan was removed from my teaching record. My principal was not allowed to conduct my second-term evaluations or any informal observations. The after-school care contractor was fired, and the district recommended a new one. My students were making amazing strides in their projects. At the end of the year, when we were getting our assignments for the next year, my principal made one last attempt to get me to leave. She told me, "Our budget doesn't have the funds for an art teacher next year, and you might want to seek employment elsewhere." I laughed in her face and said, "Nice try. My position is paid for by a state bond and isn't affected by your budget from the district. If there isn't anything else, I'll be leaving now." As I closed the door, I could hear her slam her desk and mutter under her breath. At the end of the year, I had my student share his comic book about how the principal told him to give me trouble in class at our school's talent show. This left the already upset parents even more outraged that an adult would instruct a child to act that way. I even think she had a shoe thrown at her when she ran on stage to stop him from finishing his comic. To no one's surprise, on the last day of school, she announced over the intercoms, after the students had left, that she would be resigning from our school to take a different position where she was needed, and that she would miss almost all of us. I later found out, after stalking her profile on LinkedIn 2 years later, that she had to get a job out of the district, an hour's drive away, to get another administrator role. However, she only stayed for a year before stepping down to teach English at a different school in another district the following year. And for those of you wondering how my student's comic book ended, well, the art hero rallied the students against the angry principal to make her see the errors of her ways. But the angry principal could not become happy, so she left, and the power of happiness filled the school once again. Story 2. Back in the late 90s, I ran a small auto repair shop. It was a decent gig, and I usually enjoyed my work. However, there was this one guy who always got on my nerves. He would bring his pickup truck in for repairs and then argue over the bill every single time. He'd insist on getting the price cut in half, acting like he was doing me a favor by even paying at all. This wasn't a one-time thing either. After about 5 or 6 times of him pulling this stunt, I'd had enough. One day, he brought his truck in and asked me to install a new exhaust system. Right away, I knew he was going to try the same routine, so I decided to teach him a lesson. As I installed the exhaust pipes, I did something a little extra. I welded a cap over the mufflers, but not just any cap. I drilled a 1-inch hole in the center of it. I knew this would severely restrict the exhaust flow, causing all sorts of performance issues. But honestly, I didn't care. I was fed up with this guy trying to cheat me out of my hard-earned money. After I capped the mufflers, I installed the tailpipes, making everything look perfectly normal from the outside. Sure enough, when the time came to pay, he started up with his usual nonsense. Customer: "Hey, I think you can do better on the price. How about you knock off half?" Me: "I'll give you $50 off, but that's it." Customer: "Fine, whatever." He paid the reduced amount, still grumbling, and drove off. I figured it wouldn't be long before he realized something was wrong, but that was part of the plan. A few days later, he came back to the shop, looking all annoyed. Customer: "My truck's got no power. It's backfiring every now and then, and I can barely hold highway speed. What the heck did you do to my exhaust?" Me: "Sorry, I'm swamped right now. I don't have time to take a look." He wasn't happy with that answer, but he eventually left, probably thinking I'd messed something up by accident. But I knew exactly what was going on, and I couldn't help but laugh after he drove away. I knew that restricted exhaust flow would give him trouble, but I didn't care. After all the times he tried to rip me off, it felt pretty good to know I had the upper hand this time. He was stuck with a truck that barely ran right, and it was all because he couldn't just pay his bill like everyone else. From that day on, I never saw him again. I guess he either found another shop to harass or finally learned not to mess with the person fixing his vehicle. Either way, I was glad to be rid of him. Story 3. I was on a bus heading to London for a 3-day trip that had cost me quite a bit of money. The bus had 3-seat rows, and I had paid extra to sit by the window because I get travel sick. I boarded the bus, walked to my row, and found an entitled mother Karen sitting in the aisle seat. Her entitled child Johnny, who looked about 8 years old, was lying down across the 2 seats, including my seat. I politely said, "Can you sit up, please?" Karen immediately jumped in and said, "My child can lie down if he wants to lie down." I was only 17 and not used to dealing with situations like this, so I just repeated politely, "Please get up from my seat." Karen snapped back, "Go sit somewhere else." I refused, explaining that I had paid for these seats. She continued to refuse, so I went to the back of the bus and spoke to a member of staff. He came with me, and I explained the situation. The staff member got the child to sit up right in my seat. I pointed out that Johnny was in my seat, and the staff member told Karen and Johnny that they would have to move. Karen huffed and said, "Why should he move? You can just sit where I am." I explained again that I had paid extra for the window seat because of my travel sickness. After some grumbling, she finally got her child to move. I put my bag under my seat, plugged my headphones into my phone, and started listening to music to help with the motion sickness. About 10 minutes into the 2-hour trip, Karen leaned over and said in the most entitled voice imaginable, "Can my child play on your phone?" I grinned smugly and just said, "No." She looked horrified that someone had dared to say no to her precious child. She whispered something in Johnny's ear, and after a few seconds, the boy started whining, saying he wanted to play on my phone. I told him no and to stop bothering me. He kept at it, and as I started feeling ill, I put my headphones back in to drown out the noise. Another 10 minutes passed, and Karen whispered something to Johnny again. This time, he grinned mischievously. I didn't think much of it until I felt something moving in my pocket. I turned just in time to see Johnny pull my phone out and turn away. I wasn't having any of this, so I demanded, "Give me my phone back." Karen screamed, "If my child wants your phone, he can have it." At that point, I felt really sick, so I opened the window for some fresh air. The staff member from earlier came over. Hearing the commotion, Karen quickly claimed, "This little brat tried to steal my son's phone." And then it happened. Just as she finished accusing me, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I threw up all over her son. Karen looked horrified and quickly pulled her son away. The staff member asked what had happened, and Karen repeated her lie that I had tried to steal Johnny's phone. I explained that it was actually my phone, and I could prove it by signing in and showing personal photos. The staff member took the phone from Johnny, handed it to me, and I signed in, proving it was mine. He then told Karen to get her child under control and handed her a towel to clean him up. The staff decided to swap Karen and Johnny's seats with a nice older couple who had been sitting elsewhere. The couple was very sympathetic, and we chatted a bit about how terrible Karen and Johnny were. But it wasn't over. The older couple had left their bags at Karen and Johnny's original seats, and Karen had left hers in her new seat. While I was texting my mom about what had happened, suddenly, my phone was snatched out of my hand. I looked up to see Karen standing there, and she screamed, "If Johnny can't have your phone, then you can't either." Then, to my absolute shock, she threw my phone out the window. I sat there, stunned, on the verge of tears. When I stood up, Karen shoved me back and slapped me across the face. Within seconds, the staff member grabbed her and restrained her while Johnny stood there, horrified. The bus pulled over, and within 5 minutes, a police car arrived. The police took witness statements from everyone as Karen and Johnny were bundled into the cars. One of the officers came up to me and asked if I wanted to press charges, and I instantly said yes. Later, I heard that Karen went to jail. She was charged for the cost of my phone and had to pay compensation for the experience. But the best part was the look on her face as she was shoved into the police car. Story 4. At the time, I was in my late teens or early 20s, going through that phase where you're exploring life and relationships. That period where you're out there meeting new people, and then someone special comes along who just captivates you. Suddenly, you're head over heels, thinking about spending weekends at home improvement stores and finally furnishing your place like an adult. But here's where my fairy tale took a sharp turn into a nightmare. The person I was so smitten with had a plan. She thought, if I have a baby, he'll be stuck with me forever. And so, a family was born, though it was far from the picture-perfect scenario I had envisioned. Unbeknownst to me, she had replaced her birth control with placebos, making sure to take them in front of me to avoid suspicion. Of course, things quickly went south. We broke up, and I found myself seeing the child I had been tricked into having every other weekend. I did my best to foster a good relationship with my son, even though it eventually became a twice-a-month visitation situation. During the rest of the time, I worked tirelessly, and life started to improve. 15 years later, I had gone from being a pizza delivery guy who bartended on the side to owning 3 successful businesses and other assets. Life was good, and I had found another partner who truly showed me what a lasting relationship should be like. Now, let's fast forward to the present day. My best mistake in life: my son is now 17, and I couldn't be more proud of him. He's an incredible young man, and we've developed a relationship I couldn't have dreamed of. He also has a half-brother who is 14 months younger than him. Meanwhile, my ex hasn't fared so well. She's still living in a lower-middle-class lifestyle. My son has spent every weekend and any evening he could after school, since he was 12, restoring his first car, a shell of a 1993 Mazda RX-7 we found in a junkyard. Finally, the big day arrived when we headed down to get tags, the title, and add the car to my insurance. It was the best day of both our lives as we pulled back into my shop so he could finally drive his dream car home and never have to ride the bus to school again. but, of course, there was trouble on the horizon. Here's where my entitled ex and her entitled younger son enter the story. We pulled into the driveway, my son in his beautifully restored RX-7, with its engine purring like a dream. I followed in my 2005 Mitsubishi Lancer Evo Mister. As we walked towards the house, excited and playfully punching each other's arms, my ex suddenly burst out the front door. Her younger son, the entitled kid, charged out, shoulder-checking his brother as he made a beeline for the shiny red car in the driveway. My ex, who is the mother of both boys, stepped out and eyed the two cars with a look that suggested something smelled awful within her kingdom. My son, bursting with excitement, said, "Mom, remember the car I told you Dad and I have been working on forever? It's finally done, and now I can drive myself, so you won't have to worry about taking me anywhere." My ex, however, ignored my son and stared directly at me. "Why would you give him this car? Is it nicer than mine? How much did it cost? You better have another one for the other kid." Her younger son, not missing a beat, chimed in, "Awesome. When will mine be here?" I responded, trying to stay calm. "Hold on. I have one child. He chose this car when he was 11, and we spent almost 2 years finding and restoring it. Your brother spent nearly all his free time building this car with his own hands while I helped and guided him. You were always welcome to come hang out at the shop with him, but you never did." The younger son, now excited, asked, "Can I get a GTR? I really like that silver one from Fast and Furious." My ex then added, "You know, I'm still driving the Maida you bought me in 2005. I need a new car too. Give me your keys, and you can drive my car while I take the new one." My son, visibly upset, said, "No way, Mom." My ex and I both spoke at the same time, with me saying, "Watch your mouth, please," while she yelled, "How dare you speak to me that way? Now you'll be driving nothing." Her younger son, sensing an opportunity, said, "I'll take the Maida until I get my GTR if he's not going to drive it." I put my foot down. This car legally belongs to me and is only insured for him or me to drive it. No one else will drive it, understood? My ex, not willing to back down, said, "Well, you better take me to the local BMW dealer and get me at least a used 4 Series if you think I'm letting him drive this car." Finally, my son, collecting himself, said, "Mom, Dad isn't his dad. He's not your husband, and I can't remember a time when he was. That's my car that I built with my own hands," his voice breaking as he teared up, "and I'll just sell it before Dad buys you a new car." I was both proud and concerned. I told him, "Pack a bag or 2 of your important stuff. You can drive to school from my house now." As we left, my ex screamed a boatload of insults, curse words, and demands, but we got into our cars and drove away. She's been texting me nonstop ever since. This all happened on Sunday. The next night, her younger son showed up at my shop, claiming he wanted to learn the ropes. I had to inform him that I wasn't going to buy him a car, but if he genuinely wanted to learn mechanics, I'd be happy to teach him. I also offered that when he eventually got a car, both his brother and I would help him with any modifications he wanted, and I'd get him parts at wholesale prices. Instead of being grateful, he screamed, "This is nonsense," and kicked the door of a 2015 Mustang we had in for a job, denting it badly before running out of the shop. I've since had an officer formally trespass him from my business and filed a police report. I've also pressed charges against my ex to make the constant phone calls and texts stop. Everyone will get what they deserve soon. To be continued. Story 5. This story involves a situation that toes the line when it comes to malicious compliance. However, I believe the readers here would appreciate the tale, so here it is. You can decide for yourselves whether it fits. Back in 2005, I had met a woman online. After she visited me in Australia, and I visited her in the United States, where I met her family and everything, she decided to come to Australia to be with me, and we eventually got married. But after she arrived, she faced significant challenges because her vocational college degree wasn't recognized in Australia, making it difficult for her to find a job. Despite these obstacles, she was determined and adaptable, taking on temporary jobs in clerical and receptionist roles, using the skills she had developed while working as a college librarian. Eventually, she landed a permanent position as a receptionist and clerk at a company that brokered loans. She adapted well to the job and carried on with her work. One recurring issue was that the sales representatives, who were more like predatory brokers, would often have their clients come in and then ask the women in the office to make coffee for them. However, this task was not part of their job description. My wife and her co-workers were explicitly told not to do it. It was the responsibility of the salespeople to make coffee for themselves and their clients. This policy was part of an effort to retain women in these roles since the work environment was somewhat chaotic, and women didn't tend to stay long. One day, a salesman who they referred to as a financial advisor, though he was essentially the credit business equivalent of a used car salesman, had a client come in. My wife buzzed him to inform him. He came out and told her to make coffee for both him and his client. Trying to be discreet, she reminded him that she wasn't supposed to do that. He lost his temper, went to her supervisor, and the supervisor instructed my wife to make the coffee. Later, the supervisor called her into the office and fired her. Yes, she was fired for trying to follow the rules. It wasn't exactly malicious, but karma came around anyway. Although she was fired, they asked her to stay on until they found a replacement. For the next 2 months, she continued to work there, now fully prepared to refuse anything she didn't want to do, especially making coffee. The same salesman tried to push her into making coffee again, but she flatly refused, telling him, "Go ahead and fire me." The company struggled to find a replacement. Word had spread in the local receptionist and clerical field about the problems at this company. Edit. She reminded me that the agency through which she got the job refused to send anyone else. She was the third person in a row to be let go just before the probationary period ended, so the agency wasn't receiving their commission. Eventually, she was offered a much better job with real responsibilities and respect, along with almost a 30% increase in salary. She walked into the office the next day and informed them she was leaving at the end of the day, no notice required, of course. They still hadn't found a replacement, and it took them several more months to fill the position. By that time, they were trying to replace 2 employees. Eventually, the company let the supervisor go and implemented sensible rules. My wife never looked back, but even 18 years later, we still chuckle about how getting fired worked out so well for her and how badly it ended for the supervisor who fired her for following the rules. Story 6. I worked as a server at Max and Irma's in the late 90s and had the misfortune of working under a particularly unpleasant manager who was recently hired. He was the type of person who loved to power trip but never actually did anything to earn respect from his coworkers. He never helped out in the kitchen during rush hours, often assigned extra work to servers who earned $2.65 an hour for the pettiest reasons, and spoke to the female servers with complete disrespect, even making one of them cry just because he could. Needless to say, we didn't get along well. Our busy corporate restaurant had a higher turnover rate than it should have, and this guy's behavior certainly didn't help. We ended up being short-handed for several months, which meant everyone had to do extra work. As you can imagine, doing extra work at $2.65 an hour wasn't exactly anyone's favorite thing. On this particular day, I had already done more than my fair share. I rolled 100 sets of silverware instead of the usual 50, restocked 2 sections worth of tables instead of just 1, and completed my assigned closing duties before clocking out and grabbing an employee meal. My closing duty that day was to restock service station #2. There were 3 in total. I made sure the glasses, coffee cups, paper goods, and ice were all fully stocked and everything was clean and shiny just as you'd expect. As I was clocking out, our dear manager told me I needed to restock service station #1 as well. So I went over to check it out, and it was already fully stocked and cleaned. What he had meant to say was to restock station #3, which had been heavily used, but since he said #1, I just restocked a few straws, added some coffee cups, and called it a day. About 20 minutes later, while I was sitting in the employee break room enjoying my meal with one of the line cooks, Mr. Peach, as I'll call him, came storming in, red-faced and furious. He started berating me, accusing me of insubordination. I pointed out that he had specifically told me to restock service station #1. He yelled back that I knew what he meant, and demanded that if I didn't wipe it down, restock the glassware, and refill the ice before I left, then that's it. The line cook, usually a quiet and reserved guy, even remarked, "Wow, so much disrespect," after Mr. Peach stormed out. Now, I liked the job, and I still have friends from back then, so even though I wasn't thrilled about working off the clock, I figured I'd get it done. But the whole interaction had left a bad taste in my mouth. After finishing my lunch, I quickly wiped everything down, restocked the paper goods and glassware, and got to work on the ice. When the ice bin was completely filled up normally, an ice bin is roughly waist high, I just felt like it wasn't good enough. So, I went and got another bucket full of ice. Then another, and another. I filled the ice bin until it was eye level. Still not satisfied, I hunted down a ladder and continued piling ice on top of the bin until it reached the ceiling. Then I went home. The next day, I came in for my shift, and the general manager was cracking up. She told me not to do it again, and I agreed. She rehired me on the spot, and that was the end of it. As for Mr. Peach, he put in his 2 weeks' notice shortly after that. For the remainder of his time there, he couldn't even make eye contact with me.